Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The November 2nd election is less than 2 weeks away, and the ramifications are far-reaching. The candidates at the top of the ticket would take the state in dramatically different directions. And local races from Stockton to Richmond and Oakland are being watched around the country. From legalizing pot to eliminating the 2/3 majority needed to pass the budget, the ballot propositions could change the way California is governed and funded. And there is no shortage of controversy on local Bay Area ballots. This week's election special is coming up next. Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Many of you have told us that you are voting early with mail-in ballots, so tonight our focus is on the upcoming election. We'll look at the candidates and their campaigns, the ballot initiatives, and some of the local races and issues that are in the spotlight. Joining me to help us sort it all out tonight is Rachel Gordon, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, Josh Richman, political and legal affairs reporter at the Oakland Tribune, Lisa Vorderbrueggen, political editor for the Contra Costa Times, and joining us from the state capitol is John Myers, Sacramento bureau chief for KQED Public Radio. And John, we will start with you. The latest polls show that things are breaking in one direction or the others. So tell us about the latest numbers.
Well, the latest numbers in the governor's race, Belva, I mean, this is starting to look like Jerry Brown's race to lose. The Public Policy Institute of California's poll this week had Brown up by 8 points. That's the biggest lead I think he's had in these statewide nonpartisan surveys. We're going to hear more polling this weekend, I think, and this race is really fascinating. I mean, we have spent now, you look at all the money added up, over $200 million in spending, easily, of course, $163 million of spending from the Meg Whitman campaign. And the Whitman campaign seems to be struggling, I think, to find its footing, to find its message here. It's not to say that Whitman couldn't win in the last 10 days, but the Brown campaign seems to be confident. They've had President Clinton here, former President Clinton. They've had President Obama in California. They've got all these other events going on, and you feel this momentum shift a little bit towards Brown in that race, and that's the top of the ticket, of course, that could influence a lot of other races.
What could Whitman do at this point? I mean, $163 million in expenditures, and you're still in really deep trouble when it comes to the polls?
Belva, I think that this is mainly a question of whether or not voters really believe that she's the right person. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people over the last couple of days, and we kind of all seem to come to the sense that there's a threshold issue here that the voters haven't quite met with Whitman here. Because look at if you look into that poll that I mentioned a moment ago, voters say that the jobs and the economy are the top issues this season. They believe that Whitman would be better on jobs and the economy than Brown, and yet they're still supporting Brown. And I think that somehow does get to a threshold issue of whether they think she has met that threshold of being qualified for the job. We
have to keep moving because there are so many of these races of importance, but coming right behind that is the other big race that all of you have covered in one way or the other, and of course that's the Senate race. So right. Josh, you want to take that one?
Yeah, the latest numbers that we had this week showed that while the governor's race, Jerry Brown seems to be opening a lead, it seems like Barbara Boxer's lead in the Senate race has been eroding a little bit. Carly Fiorina is coming up. The latest numbers from PPIC were 43% Boxer, 38% Fiorina, 13% undecided. The president was just in California raising money for Barbara Boxer, trying to get out the vote, but his approval rating has now dipped below 50% for the first time. He's down to 49%. So his endorsement, his backing may not have quite the punch that it did even a couple of months ago. The Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee is going to be spending big for Fiorina in these last couple of days. Fiorina herself just put another $1 million into her campaign.
Well, what about about this Republican wave we keep hearing about? It does it not seem to be working for Meg Whitman, but it's working for Carla Fiorina? Is it a difference between a state and a
I think
and a
it's
federal?
a difference between a governor's office and a race that a lot of people think could help tip the balance in the Senate. You know, you're looking at races in Washington, Nevada, California, Pennsylvania, and a few others where they're really going to be duking this out till the last hours to eke every vote out that they possibly can in hopes of shifting that balance in the U.S. Senate.
John, let me ask you about Meg Whitman spending so much money. How much has that turned off voters? It seems anytime you turn on the TV, there's a Meg Whitman commercial. And I'm wondering, when you're talking about economics and people kind of hurting at home, if they're seeing one person spending so much money on a race, they're going, wait a minute, isn't this skewed? I mean, is it backfiring on her? Of course, she had to go up against Brown with name recognition to get her name out, but did they hit saturation point at that point?
I tell you, Rachel, I've been thinking that for a long time. I mean, you start to wonder at a certain point whether it becomes part of the narrative that the voters are keeping tabs on about a person who has unlimited funds and spending all of this money. A lot of people don't think that the voters on that alone would be concerned about Whitman, but that plus of a lot of other factors. But here's a stat that I heard the other day that I've just got to say it's amazing. That in the last few weeks she's been spending around $4.5 million a week on television statewide. That translates, I'm told, into the average Californian seeing one of her ads 26 times in one day. 26 times. That's an amazing amount of saturation in politics.
Let's move to a race where we don't hear very much about at all, and that's the Attorney General's race. That's been sort of the quiet race. What happened here? Or what is happening here? Not a lot of money, lot of interest, or what?
Plenty of money. I think the gubernatorial race is sort of sucking all the air out of all of these down ticket races. But the latest numbers in that race, you've got Steve Cooley, the L.A. district attorney and Republican nominee, leading Kamala Harris, the San Francisco district attorney and Democratic nominee. Cooley 40, Harris 35. Cooley is holding on to a much bigger lead, 42-33 in L.A. County, which most people think you can't win as a Democrat. You can't win a statewide race as a Democrat if you don't carry L.A. County because it's such a big Democratic stronghold. His popularity down there may actually carry the day.
I mean, he's had a lot of popularity and crossover there because he hasn't been a really conservative Republican district attorney, right? He's been moderate when it comes to three strikes and some other
Kamala
issues.
Harris has been working hard, sort of making the circuit down there, trying to get her name recognition up, trying to build support down there, but it doesn't look like she's making a whole lot of inroads in Cooley's home turf. So.
And just to button down a few things, in the lieutenant governor's race, the mayor of San Francisco is just pulled ahead.
42% for Gavin Newsom, 37% for Abel Maldonado in the latest LA Times USC poll. Newsom also has a significant money advantage for these last couple of days that we have left. So,
how much is that, do you think, coattails of Newsom going with Jerry Brown, who was seeing this late surge with Brown? Is it that, or are people starting to know Gavin Newsom and Maldonado just hasn't caught fire?
I think it can't hurt Newsom. I think on the other hand, though, he's got to be careful because the latest polls do show that Maldonado's seen some upward movement with the Latino vote, which is very crucial. He's sapping away some of what traditionally has been a Democratic electorate. And if that trend continues, then I don't think Newsom's necessarily out of the woods yet on this.
Well, no, Newsom has issues in the Central Valley and in the more conservative areas. They're just simply not
he has
interested
much higher
in a mayor
negatives.
from San
He's
Francisco.
seen as more partisan, I think.
And I think, too, guys, keep in mind in that new poll that the decline to state voters, the non-affiliated voters, currently are breaking from Maldonado. So there is still time there to see how that one plays out.
So let me ask you what time is very quickly. What can candidates do? Belva asked this before as well, just with a week left or so of a campaign. What can they do to kind of, what are voters looking for that they haven't seen already?
I wish I knew.
I think we've seen
This is a
everything.
great
Maybe it's just a flip of a coin.
So let's turn to something we do know something about, and that's the 11th Congressional District, where there's a hot race going on there, but everybody expected that.
Right. Well, you know, to put it in context, the 11th Congressional District is the most competitive congressional district in California. It is also one of the top 40, 45 targeted House seats. in which the Republicans believe that they can use to tip the balance of power in the House of Representatives and seize majority control. So we're seeing lots of money get poured into the 11th District. The incumbent, Jerry McNerney, as you may recall, rode in on an anti-Richard Pombo wave 4 years ago. He soared on that Obama wave 2 years later. Now he's turning around looking at the tidal wave coming at him of sort of anti-incumbent sentiment. There's a lot of national force, I think, behind folks who, when they were making a decision about who to vote for in the House. It's a very split, evenly split party registration district.
Is it a bitter race?
Well, you know, it has had its moments. There's been, like all the other races we've been talking about, it's a host of distortions and untruths, you know, lack of truthiness, as I believe someone famous would say, in a lot of these mailing materials. But you have McNerney, the incumbent, running on a constituency. I've helped the constituents. I brought money for veterans. I've been open. I've had town halls. On the other side, you have David Harmer, the Republican nominee, who's saying, I'm going to cut the federal deficit. I'm going to cut your taxes. I'm going to rein in this out of control government spending and help improve the economy. He's really running on a national platform.
Lisa, how have the demographics of this district shifted from the time McNerney was first elected to now? I mean, it seems that there were the liberal voters from kind of the core Bay Area who were moving into that area for cheaper home prices, but that seems to have changed a lot, hasn't it?
Well, when McNerney first ran 4 years ago, the district was 6-7 points favored Republicans, you know, in terms of registration. It's now dead even, and interestingly, that sort of runs counter to what you might think. If you have a lot of Bay Area residents moving out to the Tracy area, you would think that it would be more liberal, but that's not how it's worked. It's actually the more conservative voters are the ones moving out.
That's the one place there is a Tea Party movement of some sort.
There is a Tea Party and a conservative active movement out in that area, and they've been making themselves heard. So there's going to be a debate tomorrow night in Tracy, a live face-to-face showdown between the two, and we're already getting all kinds of information that both sides, the MoveOn.orgs and the Tea Party people, are going to show up.
We got a couple of hot races for mayor in Oakland as well as in Richmond. So you want to start with Oakland there?
Yeah, Oakland, 10 candidates, but 4 who seem to be leading the pack. Don Parada, the former state Senate leader, Rebecca Kaplan, city councilwoman, Jean Kwan, city councilwoman, and Joe Tooman. And they're all talking about promoting Oakland and attracting and retaining jobs. They're all talking about fiscal responsibility in City Hall. They're all talking about local hiring and green jobs, and all with varying degrees of specificity. But the real confusion in this is this is the first time that Oakland voters are using ranked choice voting, and there's all kinds of machinations going on about who to pick first, second, and third, so that, if the first round doesn't produce a winner, then when they go to the second round, somebody will pull ahead, and it's all very confusing.
The benefit of that is there will be a winner, there would be a runoff.
There will not be a runoff. There will be a winner. It'll probably take several days to figure out who that is.
Well, Josh, I was going to ask you. I mean, from watching from my vantage point, one of the last places that we always get returns is Alameda County.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, given this new voting system, I mean, is everybody gearing up? I mean, are the campaign attorneys ready to watch all of this? I mean, how's it going to play out?
Oh, I'm sure they'll be watching like hawks, but I don't think gearing up is really the word. I think settling in for a long haul is probably more like it. It's going to take a while to sort this out.
As long as they don't have to do hand counts, which was one of the things that happened in San Francisco once with ranked choice voting that they were talking about, and that would have thrown everything. I mean, really, ranked choice voting is letting the machines count.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to take much longer, but it does take away your ability to have a runoff and really kind of concentrate on what the candidates are for.
So let's talk about Richmond. They're not faced with ranked choice voting, but they are faced with...
No ranked choice voting in Richmond yet, if the trend moves. But we have an incumbent, Gail McLaughlin. She has 2 challengers, Nat Bates, who's a city councilman, and John Zensenhenny, who's a businessman who used to be on the council. And the firefighters and the police unions have come out in heavy force against the incumbent Gail McLaughlin. They've unearthed bankruptcy documents that showed she she tried to not pay some student loans and some other issues. Lots of money being spent there. They believe she's anti-jobs, and so they're coming out for her big time. So I talked to someone in Richmond today, 17 pieces of mail in one day, hitting the mailboxes in Richmond.
So
16
much
of them
reading for people to do
from
now.
Richmond City Councils. Yeah, I don't think people read them. I think the recycle bins are going to be extra full this week.
Okay, we're going to move to some of the state propositions. We're going to start with you, John Myers, if you don't mind. Tell us a bit about 20 and 27.
20 and 27, the joined at the hip, it feels like, in a way, the campaign, and everybody acknowledges that the voters have got to weigh this out. Prop 20, which would add congressional map drawing to the powers of the soon-to-be-created Citizens Redistricting Commission. Prop 27 would do away with the entire Citizens Commission, give all the map drawing of Congress and legislature back to the state capitol, back to the lawmakers there. You know, honestly, bottom line here is Prop 27 was put on the ballot by congressional Democrats. It's what we call in politics the murder-suicide pact. We don't really care if Prop 27 passes. We don't want Prop 20 to pass, goes that theory. We don't want congressional maps drawn anywhere but the legislature. The governor is in support of 20. A lot of the good government groups are in support of Prop 20. You know, this really comes down, I think, you know, are the voters going to be confused? Are they going to see through that? It's been very fascinating to watch all of these Democrats in the California delegation giving lots of money to Prop 27 to try to knock this thing down.
So that brings us to one that earlier on, both John, you and Josh sort of thought was the hot number, and of course that's the POT initiative, Prop 19. How is it doing?
Well, I wouldn't rush out and buy a new bong just yet. I think the numbers this week from PPIC showed an 8-point drop in support from 52 down to 44 from September to October for the measure. And then the new numbers out today from the LA Times USC poll showed it at only 39% support. So I've got people telling me that, well, you know, people aren't polling accurately on this because they won't admit to a live interviewer that they support marijuana. I'll believe that when I see it. I think this thing is heading for failure. They don't have a lot of money to advertise. They never did. And I just don't see it.
Could one of the problems be the facts are coming out about the savings that might come from those people?
There have been some negative stories about the potential savings. There have been some negative stories about whether it would actually have any effect on the Mexican cartel violence that's been going on. The NAACP and the Drug Policy Alliance did roll out a study today underscoring the fact that marijuana enforcement, at least for small possession arrests, has been very disproportionately targeted toward blacks, and that's a civil rights angle that they've been trying to push. It just doesn't seem like they're getting a lot of traction.
And hasn't the Obama administration also come out and said, look, even if California does this, it's going to violate federal law?
We will keep enforcing federal law. That's what they said, yeah.
Well, let's get around to the thing that's held up the legislature. So, John, that's back to you. For months and months, and that is to get a budget, and the way you go about doing that is to change the law according to Proposition 25. So explain that a little bit more.
Well, Prop 25, again, talking about the polling that we saw this week, is stuck, and it's stuck just below the 50% level. And of course, that's a real trouble, I think, for the supporters of it. But right, it would make it easier to pass a budget, a majority vote in each house of the legislature. It would retain the 2/3 vote for a tax increase, though the No on 25 campaign has disputed that. They said there are all these kind of backdoor ways you could raise taxes easier. That, I don't think, has become a central part of the campaign. I think what's fascinating, though, is we just sat through the longest budget impasse in California history, 100 days. You would think that that would have pushed the needle up, if anything ever was going to say, yes, we have got to make it easier to pass a budget. And yet that thing is still stuck right below 50%. So that's a tough place to be 10 days out.
What are the propositions that are looking like they may pass? I mean, are they
You know, that's actually an interesting point, Belva. If you look at the measures, everything seems to be struggling right now. Yes. I mean, at least the ones that we've seen polling on, everything is struggling. Proposition 23, which I don't know if we're going to talk about, but the climate change one, getting killed in the polls. So, I mean, you could have a clean sweep of almost nothing passing.
What about, John, Prop 26, which would have to have fees go to a vote of the people, which has local jurisdictions extremely nervous?
Yeah, that one's fascinating because that one does typically play into this notion of, let's make it harder to raise taxes, fees. We get all confused on what's a tax and what's a fee around the state.
And state parks, we like state parks, right? Do we not like state parks?
The polling I have seen on the state parks one is tough. I mean, that's again opposing a vehicle fee that makes it to fund state parks. I think that one's tough. Again, this economy is very strange, and I don't know with the voters in as sour mood as they are exactly what they're going to support and what they're not going to support. I mean, I think you're right, Rachel. I think that the fees one could pass. The redistricting one, Prop 20 we talked about, could pass. But this is going to be a long night for a lot of these measures, I think.
Well, we know we're moving pretty fast here. We're very well aware of that because there is so much for your attention. But for an easy-to-read digest of all of the statewide propositions, go to kqed.org/thisweek. There are a range of critical local ballot measures around the Bay. So, Rachel Gordon, you've got the whole Bay Area here to tell us about.
Yeah, make sure, folks, if you're watching this, you go and get your notebooks. But we're going to go down just kind of some of the highlights around the Bay Area.
It's like speed dating, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Speed dating for voters.
In San Francisco, there's Proposition L. It would ban sitting and lying on sidewalks between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. That's backed by Mayor Gavin Newsom and the police chief. Proposition B is probably the most controversial measure. It's a pension healthcare benefit reform package that's being pushed by the public defender, Jeff Adachi, very strongly opposed by the public employees unions. Proposition D would allow the parents of kids in the public schools to vote in school board elections, even if they're non-citizens. So it's a non-citizens ballot measure. And Measure AA would add $10 to the vehicle registration fee, pay for transportation projects. There are more than a half a dozen Bay Area jurisdictions that are voting on a similar car registration fee. In the North Bay, Measures S and T, it's in Marin County, it talks about the desalinization plant. They're competing measures. If you vote for S, you're in favor of going forward with desalinization. I can't say that. If you're for T, you wanted to go through even more votes, make it more rigorous. In the South Bay, Measure U in San Jose, that's saying, look, if Californians say yes to legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing it, they can add taxes to marijuana businesses. Measure K in Half Moon Bay is about a sales tax to bring more money into that city, which has been struggling like many others with its revenue. In the East Bay, Measure U is a non-binding advisory measure having to do with the casinos. Measure BB and Measure X in Oakland, pay attention to those. Kind of competing, they could be companion, but they're looked at as competing measures for police funding. And Measure W in San Ramon talks about urban growth boundaries. So there's a wide range of issues that voters are looking at. Tons of money, tons of interest, a lot for Bay Area voters to digest.
Are taxes at the core of many of these measures around?
A lot of them are sales taxes, school parcel fees. You can go down the list. I mean, we know that every government agency, except for BART, it seems, in a strange way, is struggling to make their ends meet. The health and pension costs are skyrocketing. They're having less money from sales tax, property tax, business taxes coming in because of the economy. They're looking for any way to try to bolster their resources.
It's not just San Jose that has the marijuana taxes either. Oakland is looking to increase its medical pot tax and institute a non-medical pot tax. Richmond, and Albany too, right?
Albany too. Yeah. And out in Contra Costa, I would add that the cities of Pleasant Hill, Concord, and Antioch all have sales or use taxes. They say that their city finances could really go down the tubes if they don't get this money. And there's also a bunch of school parcel and sales and bonds as well, so that they could keep their programs going.
Right.
So
and
pretty much every agency is looking for money.
Right. San Francisco's looking at raising the hotel tax, which has the business community very nervous, but the public employees, the unions are saying, look, we've got to do what we can to protect services.
Rachel, what on your alphabet soup there, sorry for all of those, but going back to San Francisco and that pension measure, I mean, we all keep talking about this tip of the iceberg of public employee pensions and pension reform. I mean, you said that one was a hot one. I mean, just standard lines there, unions versus not?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's not only just unions, it's also almost every elected official in San Francisco has come out very strongly against this, except Jeff Adachi, the public defender, who to this point had been kind of one of the torchbearers for the progressive community. Now he's looked at as like this terrible guy for going after it, but he's saying you've got to do something to rein in costs. They're costing, it's just costing San Francisco too much. It would have, very simply what it would do is every city employee would have to start paying more into their pension funds, and they'd also have to pick up more costs for dependent health care, and that's what has a lot of the individual city workers very nervous.
Okay, final question. From money to media, what has made, and the importance of the Latino vote, what has made this election cycle different from those all of you've covered?
Well,
Well, the level of acrimony has certainly gotten. It seems as though the bar for what gets put out in ads and in mailers has just gotten lower and lower and lower until pretty soon we won't have to play limbo. We'll just step over it and we won't bother. And that has, I would say, in my career, I've never seen it just drop so low. And we've got, what, 10% approval rating for the legislature, similar record low numbers.
But we're
for
seeing this
approvals.
also nationally in Congress.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's just such bitter rancor going on now with no one really paying attention to the needs of the voters necessarily or policy. It's really kind of the us versus them, no matter what.
And I think the money is important too. I mean, the unprecedented spending in the gubernatorial race, the sort of shadow money that's coming in from independent expenditure committees and stuff, the effect of the Citizens United
Correct, on the
ruling.
federal races, yeah.
And
It's amazing.
And I'll tell you, Belva, too, I would just say quickly, I think voters are just, they're in a bad mood, and the economy is bad. I mean, look at this poll we had last week. 62% of the people surveyed said they're worried about making their rent or mortgage. I mean, people just, they don't have the bandwidth, the capacity, I think. And I think voter tune-out is what I'm really fascinated by in this race with all of that money and all of that anger.
Last few seconds, do you think legislators who are not running for office, holding office, have a feel that we reached some sort of watershed here? No?
No.
I don't know. Have we ever seen a watershed? We always, as journalists, look for the watershed moments, and then
Yes.
next year we're still looking for them. I don't know. I haven't seen them. Have you?
We may be too cynical for that question.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Well, and I think, too, you've got to see who the leadership is. You've got to look at who the next governor of the state is and what message do they send about how we get out of the problems we're in. That's going to be a real key thing, I think.
Well, we will have a new governor and partially a new legislature, so, you know, who knows what's ahead. Well, that is about it. That's all the time that we have, but we'll continue the discussion next Friday night when we look at Propositions 21 and 23 and bring you the latest on the campaigns and the candidates. So please remember that democracy only works if you as citizens, well, all of us, care enough to learn as much as we can and then to go out and vote. So read your voter's handbook, I plead with you. Go to kqed.org/thisweek to tap into the KQED election resources. We thank you for watching, and we thank all of you for doing such a terrific job. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.